We've turned science into a false god.
Well, hello, folk and flick, my real and imaginary friends. If you're watching, thanks a lot for watching. I hope you'll watch the whole video and click like and subscribe and all that stuff. It would help inspire me to do better work. Um, I'm going to talk today again about Alex Kaschuta and her Subversive podcast, which I was listening to for my recent walks around the neighborhood. She explores the new right and heterodox thinking and stuff like that, things that supposedly are not tolerated in the mainstream media. Uh, People from the right who are intelligent, articulate, who are, well read, who have spent time with the books and, have legitimate, interesting ideas coming from their perspective. I'm still trying to understand what it is new right people want, where they want it to happen, and what is the new right in opposition to, but very specifically, like let's define left wing and let's define how we're opposed to left whatnots and so on. Because the world we live in is really complicated. There are lots of things that overlap. And it's very difficult to categorize human, cultural, and sociological and social and political things uh, definitively and dogmatically, put them all in a little box and say, this is what this is. This is kind of a platonic thing. And real life doesn't seem to work that way, which is why we go in different directions over periods of time. I think a lot of what bothers new right people is wokeness, political correctness, all of this postmodernism that's gotten so extreme and divorced from its origins and its context, like Derrida and Foucault. When were they writing? What were they really writing about? Are we scholars of their work? No. But their work has been bastardized or messed with to such a degree that it introduces things in our world that are extremely annoying. I get that. Trust me, I get it. Well, recently I saw a piece of hers which was with Spencer Klavan. He apparently has some really good podcast. He's a classicist. I'm going to put the episode from YouTube, that link, in the description to this video so you can have a look at that. I'm not going to try to characterize where he's coming from. I'm not that familiar with his work. But according to her show notes, he's a classicist and he has some fairly interesting things going on the internet that you can look up and see. The Young Heretics show, for example. Anyway, go ahead and watch the video podcast on YouTube or listen to it. I'll put links. Anyway, I was watching one thing I stumbled upon because I was, Googling Mr. Klavan, and I saw a quick video, a short 2 minute 45-second video where he said something about we have made science into a false god, and it was interesting and articulate, and no argument that I haven't heard before. Many times over the years from all kinds of sources, extremely philosophic ones. Hold on, I'm going to put this on pause because the door is making tons of noise. Okay, that distraction has been dealt with. So anyway, you read philosophy over the years and you hear various arguments like these coming from apologists like Dinesh D'Souza and philosophers like St. Thomas Aquinas. I mean, the whole spectrum. You can go way, way back. But he's a classicist, and he's also a Christian. Interesting guy, interesting points he made, nothing new. But the idea is that scientism, I guess, the idea is a kind of a religion, or we've turned it into a god. I understand the feeling there because, you know, we can have this sense where we worship, you know, the products of science and so on. But I actually think science is something else. So in the comments to his video, I wrote the following, and I'm just going to read it to you. Sorry for that. I don't have a teleprompter, and I know it's boring to read things to the camera, but if I do it extemporaneously, I can't make the same point that I want. So anyway, I said excellent points. I did enjoy the video. He's like an anti-Carl Sagan. And sorry for the pun. But, you know, he's got a good voice. He sounds like somebody who could be an influencer for the new right. Oh, he is, I'm sure. And like Carl Sagan was an evangelist, pardon me, for science during his time. So I said, science is a robust quiver of tools and processes that help us understand how the material world works. But without the humanities, it's hard to be human. Does more than matter emerge from matter, or is it some anti-thing else? How shall the material me or the spiritual me define God? I always have a problem with, like, when people talk about God or spirit or whatever's not material, because I want to know what that is. And I guess you just have to have faith and believe something. For some people, it's like, you know, choose the Catholic way, or choose the Orthodox Christian way, or choose, you know, some other way, the Tao or whatever. But then you know. But anyway, I'm not capable of doing that. Maybe I don't have the right gene, or, you know, I was brought up a Catholic, so, but, you know, I'm incapable of that, so I'm deficient in that way. So is the way faithful people exploit the world better than consumers or players who use science to acquire wealth and power? So, you know, faithful people, I mean people of a certain, you know, faith, who with certain beliefs that, you know, permeate their lives and actions and so on. And of course, we know that the will to power involves a lot of things. You have to have the money, you have to have the rules for rulers, and you have to have their resources and so on in order to be an effective player. You have to be hyper competitive because you want to be a hyper agent or super agent. You want a lot of ability to mold and shape things. People on the new right talk about a new Caesar or whatever, but, you know, I mean, we don't live in a set of circumstances that produce Caesar. He was a Roman of a certain time and place, and he had a background, and he came from a certain kind of family, and he was brought up a certain way, and he had certain kinds of experiences, and this all made him Caesar, or Caesar, sorry, but it didn't prevent Caesar from getting stabbed to death by a bunch of pissed off senators and so on. You know, he may have been a genius and a great leader, a wonderful king, but in the end he got whacked. And, you know, you can look at Charlemagne in his context, the Holy Roman Empire, Alexander, whatever. All these things had their time and place. They arose from very specific circumstances, and they disappeared. Something else replaced them. They were superseded by something. And here we go again. So how about the dependence of science? Dependence as in, I'm a dependent of my parents. Are we addicted to a false god? So we depend on science. I'm depending on it right now. He mentioned that in his video. Does that mean I'm addicted to a false god? I play with my iPhone all day, so I'm addicted to a false god. I don't see my iPhone as God. I see it as kind of godlike in the sense that the technology and how it works is mysterious to me. I don't understand the physics. So how must the faithful find a balance between ecology, science, and man's nature? So it seems like New Right people have an idea about what's man's nature, Bronze Age, whatnot. Of course, ecology, we're part and parcel of the natural living world, biology, ecology, ecosystems, and so on. And we also seem to think that, maybe Brits or Dutch people or Portuguese people were God's chosen people, and they're the ones that should be exploiting all the resources because somehow they're closer to God or whatever. So all the resources that are there for me and mine, not for you and yours, that should be obvious because we're more civilized, we're more cultured, we have better guns, better technology, better books, and so on and so forth. So, my nature is better than your nature, but mankind has a certain type of nature, and we know what that is somehow. Wealthy, powerful people, super agents, hyper agents want to exploit all the power and resources that they have to have more power and more resources, more control over power and resources. That includes human beings, animals, minerals, atoms, bits, technologies, what have you, right? The well is for my people. I can share it with you if I want to, but if you just steal from my well, you're dead. So how must the faithful balance between ecology, science, and man's nature? Is science the new forbidden fruit responsible for the second falling of man? I've heard New Right people say that the big disaster has already hit us, and that is social media, this terrible thing that has got us all enthralled and in its clutches. And I listened to a thing about gun violence in the States and mental health and how those things are intertwined and how mental health went down for young women and men when social media took off. There's something about it that screws up our circadian rhythms and kind of wrecks our attention and our life and puts us into weird contexts and weird groups of people that mess with our mental health. It's a pathological thing, social media. And it's linked to gun violence in the United States. But of course, before there was social media, there was a lot of violence in the United States. Weathermen in the 60s, political assassinations, Kennedy's, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, choose whatever. You had your civil rights thing, your KKK thing, and then in Europe, World War I, World War II, we don't even have to go back to the 30 Years' War. Human beings tend to find a way to get really violent towards each other. It's tragic. I laugh because it freaks me out. And sometimes I laugh when I'm nervous. But anyway, yeah, so there's been a lot of violence in the U.S. And people, when I was a kid, I had lots of guns to play with, real guns and toy guns. And I hunted and all that kind of thing. And I was played cowboys and Indians, and we loved gangsters. I love The Godfather. I love Boardwalk Empire. I love Peaky Blinders. It's all great. we want to have our everyday carry knives, and we want to go to the range and shoot powerful guns and all this kind of thing. But also we watch UFC and American football. And, we tend to think that violence has some utility in society and that it's an important part of being a man, right? Got to kick some ass, beat some people up. So America in particular is a very violent place. I mean, you might go to Honduras, or you might go to Cambodia during Pol Pot, or Vietnam during the Vietnam War, and find more violence of a different kind, inspired by different things. We live in a violent world, but less violent, arguably, than it has been historically, since civilization came to scale. Lots of people living in big cities, lots of surplus of grains and whatnot. Anyway, America's a violent place. I think we can understand that. Maybe the UK is, maybe Anglo-Saxons are more violent than us, other people. I don't know. It depends on the time and the place. What's motivating the violence? Is it the Mongol hordes, the Scythians, the Vikings, or just street gangs? I don't like people from Brooklyn. I'm from Staten Island. Those people aren't my people. Anyway, you get the drift, right? So is science the new forbidden fruit responsible for the second falling of man? I don't think so. Science is science. Can Ben Goldacre discern the difference between good and bad science without appealing to Aristotle? So Ben Goldacre wrote 2 books that I've read, Bad Pharma and Bad Science, and he just explores what makes the institution of science, or pharmacology, big pharma, bad. What corrupts it? What messes it up? Now, anything can become bad because some incentives encourage us to do bad things. And money is a big part of that. So if we're really incentivized by money, sometimes we'll do bad things to get money. If we're incentivized by fame and fortune, or maybe we're just incentivized to keep our career going and growing, and we want to get better and go up the ladder and so on and so forth. So there's all kinds of incentives, and sometimes these incentives can become bad, become corrupted, warped, and then they screw us up, and then we do bad things. So he explored that. And do we need Aristotle to explore the bad science and bad, pharma? Well, Aristotle's not somebody that we shouldn't study. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, whatever. But, we can also discern good and bad pharma without Aristotle, in my opinion. Are there non-overlapping best practices in different realms that allow for a spiritually healthy coexistence of scientific progress and traditional values? Remember non-overlapping magisteria. I'm kind of going there, can we be spiritually healthy human beings and still have science? Well, obviously, because there are people in the world that seem pretty well adjusted on all levels, including wisdom and spirituality, and still love science. They'll get their vaccination if the vaccine's proven to be efficacious and mitigates the risk of dying. So anyway, I'm particularly thinking of the Age of Wonder now, a period of history when Christian alchemists became chemists. So yeah, we can hearken back to Isaac Newton's period and so on. These people were complicated people. They thought about the soul. They thought about God. They thought about Christ. They thought about magic. They thought about alchemy. Things were still extremely mysterious during the Age of Wonder, but also science was starting to catch on. So experimental, observational, institutional science, collaboration across nations, across communities, where the network and the individual seekers that are trying to discover something about nature, about the world. Spencer alluded to the fact that, science is there to learn about nature. And yeah, that's true. What's wrong with that? And if there's something outside of nature, how do we know that? So these questions have been asked for thousands of years. And much smarter people than myself have discussed them, and any of us can go and read those books and contemplate them and come up with our own reactions or ideas to those books. So yeah, the Age of Wonder, that's one of my favorite periods of history in Western civilization to study. I think it's an interesting paradigm shift happening over the course of many decades, hundreds of years. So one thing is certain, science is not a religion. That's my opinion. And I think it's kind of a mistake, a categorical mistake, to think that science is a religion. I don't know anybody who's interested and appreciates science who thinks it's a religion. I have friends who are Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, Sikhs, who appreciate science, and they don't equate that with religion. So I don't know, man. I don't think a thinking, rational, sincere, intellectually honest person can mistake the processes and tools of science, mathematics, logic, reason, rationality, microscopes, telescopes, chemistry, all this stuff that we use to learn about nature, and think that that's religion. It's not. So science doesn't prove or disprove the existence of God, nor does science claim to be God. I just don't know any science people who think that they're God. And I don't think you can prove something that's immaterial through material science. That's a faith question. So, you'll figure it out through your thoughts and prayers and meditations and sacrifices and all the challenges in life and pain and everything. In a sense, science gives us godlike power. That's one thing for sure. And, perhaps we need a source of wisdom to manage this power optimally, right? If we don't slow down and think about the second, third, and fourth level consequences of powerful technology and science, we may experience effects, externalities, and so on that are very deleterious to health. And when I talk about health, I'm talking about life, ecology, not just people. But because people depend on mushrooms and worms and bacteria and all kinds of other forms of life, right? We can't exist independent of that unless there's some singularity process where we literally become machines and are completely divorced from natural biological life, right? So these are different things. I'm not really a singularity kind of guy, nor do I want to live forever. I think I'd get bored with myself. But anyway, so wisdom, yeah, we need it. Regardless of all the questions the philosophy of science presents, there are many good reasons people have faith in science. I mean, you get shot and you get taken to a trauma care place, and they have all those tools available to help you survive after getting shot. That's pretty nice. Antibiotics, yeah, but not just medical stuff. Thank you for the camera. Thank you for the YouTube. Thank you for your time and all that stuff. And then I finished by saying, let's revisit Kant's categorical imperative. And I'm going to leave a link to a video that explains this really, really well. I'm a big fan of this guy and a philosophy teacher. You should look at Kant. You should look at Spinoza. You should look at Leibniz. You should look at Schopenhauer. You should look at Swedenborg and Thomas Aquinas and all that kind of stuff. People have been thinking about this for a long, long time, outside of the context of the far left, Black Lives Matter, the new right, whether or not we should be Eastern Orthodox Russian, Eastern Orthodox Ukraine, Eastern Orthodox Greek, whether we should be Catholic or Protestant. I just want to know what the new right wants. Is it a place in Idaho where a certain kind of people can have a certain kind of culture and live and let live? You know, the Eastern Washington tribe can do their thing, and the Western Washington tribe can do their thing. And where do we draw from that? What is that culture? Do I do my 23andMe and say, I am indeed 99% European? I've got my Neanderthal genes, mostly Northern European, and 10% or so Southern European, and that's me. So I qualify on the 23andMe scale. I qualify on the Western civilization scale, in the sense that I was brought up in Ireland and the United States, and I was educated in those systems. I was brought up Catholic. I can tick a whole bunch of boxes to be an authentic Western Civ white guy, but sometimes I think that, you know, Western civilization is a culture that's bigger than just your 23andMe, right? Your genes. Because I know a lot of American people whose parents are from India, who are just as Western as can be. And I know a lot of Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans, Latin Americans, African Americans also. And then within the United States, there are subsets of our culture. You know, South Side Chicago, East Side Chicago. There's Tokyo versus Kansai, you know. There's Shanghai versus Beijing, and so on. And so is it a cultural thing? I don't want to use the word construct because that sounds too postmodern, but is it a cultural construct? Did it emerge from history, you know, kind of evolving into a thing over thousands of years? You know, when did it become Western civilization? Was that Greek, Greco-Roman? Was that Holy Roman Empire thing? Was that Anglo-Saxon thing? What about all these people invading England over the centuries, trying to run that territory? Were those races of people? How do you define race? Culturally? Where did those pagan cultures emerge from? And why did they change at scale into something else? What was the utility of Christianity in many different ways? What's the utility of it? Schmachtenberger was saying that the plow killed animism, because once you can yoke and cut the balls off an ox and beat it all day to work it to death to grow grains, you can't, you know, revere the spirit of the ox anymore. It's just a beast of burden. That's how we treated slaves in the United States. Now, slaves in the Ottoman Empire were treated differently. And there were different classes of slaves in Rome and in the Ottoman Empire. Chattel slavery, are you just going to work the slaves to death? You know, you have to calculate the calories in, the output of work, the market of cotton, the price discovery in the market of cotton and all the economic stuff and whatnot. And then you can't see these these slaves as human because you have to dehumanize them because they're beasts of burden. If you revere them, they have a soul and a spirit and they're God's creatures and whatnot. How can you justify owning them and beating them and making them work for you? These are really complicated questions. Culture is difficult. It's not easy. It's difficult to create, it's difficult to adhere to, it's difficult to understand. So what is it? What is Western civilization? Don't tell me it's Australia, New Zealand, Europe, America, Canada, whatever. If you believe in a white ethno-state, just come out and say it. That you think white people are better genetically adjusted to Western civilization than anybody else. You can have like savants that come from Nigeria and just get Western civilization, or they come from celestials coming from China who just get it for some reason. They're savants. What is it really? Just tell me what it is. And that's great. And put it in its context, you know? Where are the borders? What is it opposed to? I don't know much about Islam, so I can very easily, you know, contemplate the possible differences between, you know, Islam, a certain kind of Islam and versus Christianity or whatever. But I'm also looking at fanaticism, and you can have fanatic right-wing Christians who are really pretty dangerous, just like you had in Europe for centuries, you know. Why did they kill Christians back in the day, you know, crucify them? And when did it scale up to become a certain canon, a certain power structure, you know, in the Catholic Church, and suddenly become the hyperstructure for a whole new way of doing business in Europe? What caused those transitions, those changes? Is it a miracle? God intervened? You know, because there weren't that many Christians for a long time after Jesus came and died on the cross for our sins. But again, everybody's going to have their interpretations of this. People are going to not agree with one another on these interpretations. So where does the new right cohere? And what does it develop? So the podcast was interesting because Alex and Spencer were making great insightful comments about how these are difficult questions. You know, Alex is in Romania. She lives in a Hungarian part of Romania, so obviously there are cultural differences and language differences there. They all come into play. She's New Right. She's a woman. She talks to misogynists. I think that's freaking awesome. I want to talk to New Right people because I want them to set me straight, teach me about their thing. But I also want to have the opportunity to ask questions and ask them, you know, what they think about Spinoza's God versus whatever God they've got in their head. And I want to know where they got that God, where they learned it from, who they learned it from, the information they've drawn upon to have their ideas, to develop their ideology. So That's why I look at Arval, and that's why I'm interested in the New Right, because it seems to me a huge reaction to postmodernism and this false concept of neo-Marxism. All of these things politically motivated and co-opted by power structures, powerful groups that just use it to mess with us so that they can get our votes and get us to support their attempts at playing the game, winning the game. So sometimes I think the causes of our problems are different from what a left-wing person might think is the cause or a right-wing person might think is the cause. There's some more systemic, structural, and philosophic reasons that we're not necessarily aware of that's causing the big problem. And then we just point fingers at each other, blame each other, and enter into the culture war. And sometimes I think that's just terribly unproductive. It doesn't get us anywhere. In the meantime, the sixth extinction is real. You can look at the data, you can look at the science. It's not God talking, it's just what it is. And there are things that we need to work on globally, across cultures, across nation states. And then, of course, there are things we have to work on individually, within our family dynamics, within our community, within our city, our country. So how wide and do you want to go? You know, Cospelon, cosmic perspective, and salon in the living room, but also internally, you know, being able to look at yourself and evaluate yourself and critique yourself and understand yourself. Like, where did I get this stuff? What's going on with me? I'm an old guy. I'm a baby boomer. My cup does not runneth over. My cup is always half empty because I'll never be that smart. Even if I live 1,000 years. So, yeah, we have limits, we have constraints. We have to learn how to live within those limits and constraints. And I'm going to end this video by playing.
This isn't just true of mafia hitmen, it's true of all the evil acts that all of us, and I mean all of us, do when we know we're doing something wrong. Let's take the example, I mean, I could take an example like pickpocketing, right? But most of us don't turn out to be pickpockets. Let's take something like I don't know, double parking or the small infractions that we make. We recognize we don't want everyone to disobey these rules. At the same time, we kind of figure that we should be the exception. Right? Think about it. All pickpockets in the world, they want to be able to walk away with other people's wallets, but they don't want their own wallet taken. Right? Do you get the idea? All of the evils that we do come from acknowledging a certain universality in moral rules and then saying that I should be the only exception. Kant's point is that that's irrational, that is literally speaking heteronomous in the Humean sense. When you make these arbitrary exceptions to the universal moral rule, what you're really doing is succumbing to heteronomy, succumbing to the lure of your passions, succumbing to your desire to be an exception to the moral rules that you really deep down know apply to everybody. Think about how many people in America cheat on their income taxes. Do all these people want everybody to cheat on their income taxes? Because then the government wouldn't work, and we all recognize it. We ought to pay our taxes. And yet many people will play with the numbers, thinking that everybody else should be paying their full share. But me, I'm going to play with it a little bit. What they're doing there is operating heteronomously. They are not behaving freely. And for Kant, free behavior and rational behavior are the same thing. To be free is the same thing as being rational in the tradition of German idealism. So what does this mean? It means that when we behave heteronomously, we're behaving passionately, we're behaving irrationally. And that means we're breaking the categorical imperative and we're doing what we know is wrong. When we behave rationally, that's the same thing as behaving freely. When we behave freely and rationally, that's the same thing as behaving autonomously. When we're behaving autonomously, freely, rationally, we're following the categorical imperative, and that's the same thing as being virtuous. It means that we're living up to the moral rules that we deep down know apply to everybody. We're making no exceptions for ourselves, and this freedom, this autonomy, remember, autonomy comes from the Greek words autonomos, making laws for oneself. That's Kant's conception of freedom. It's an idea derived from Rousseau. Freedom is not the arbitrary liberties of the savage in the state of nature. For Kant, freedom is regulated freedom under law. Freedom is the activity of making a moral law that you yourself obey. This is what enlightenment is, coming to our maturity, taking responsibility for our actions, realizing that there is one universal moral law which commands us to become free, rational, good, virtuous moral agents.
I'm sure he's read it. If he hasn't, he should. Okay, sorry. That was a long one. Thanks for watching, and like, subscribe. Always read the show notes or the video description, because I put links in there, and I'm a curator more than anything else. I'm not a teacher, not an expert. I'm an old guy who's done a lot of things, lived in a lot of countries, read a lot of books. That's my claim to fame. Bouliam T, out.